Let's talk first, though, about the very latest government U-turn. We haven't had one for at least a week, but we have had one today. Keir Starmer has backtracked again, this time on the government's insistence that cancelling, or at least postponing, local elections due this May for millions of voters in more than 30 council areas was the right thing to do. After legal action by Reform UK, the government has backtracked. Those elections will go ahead as initially planned in early May this year. Let's talk to Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, MP for Boston and Skegness. Mr Tice, good to have you back on the programme. Thanks very much indeed for coming on tonight. It was your party's legal action that I think it's fair to say helped prompt this latest government U-turn. Why is it so important that these elections go ahead this May rather than next May?
Because that's what democracy is all about. Sometimes it's inconvenient, sometimes it is costly, but actually it's the opportunity for voters every 4 years or whatever the period is to have their say. And it's the very essence of who we are as a great democratic nation. And so we're delighted that finally the government has caved in. They would not have caved in, they would have carried on with these cancellations had we not pursued this legal action. It was due to go to the High Court this Thursday and Friday. But now the government, having received some more legal advice at the last minute, has not only caved in, but agreed to pay all of our legal costs, quite rightly, too. And the question now is, who's going to resign on the back of this?
Well, who should resign? Who should resign?
Well, at the very least, Steve Reed, the Secretary of State for housing, communities and local government. I mean, I challenged him time and again in the House of Commons on this issue. And so I think at the very least it should be him. Or should it actually be the Prime Minister, who also tried to cancel democracy, who's now making, he's making a sort of an art form of U-turns. I think this is the 15th or 16th that we can count.
But Mitch, when you say cancel democracy, we're talking about postponing local council elections for 12 months.
We're talking about 5 million people.
This is hardly Vladimir Putin territory.
We're talking about cancelling for 5 million people. When do you stop? If you just say, it costs a bit and therefore we're going to save a few quid, you might as well just cancel the whole thing. No, that's not how we do it.
The government's argument on this, as you'll be very familiar with, is that a lot of these councils won't exist next year. They're being they're merged with other councils as part of a sort of local government reorganisation. And their argument was, what's the point in spending tens of millions of pounds organising elections to elect people who won't have a job in 12 months' time? Which, when it comes to taxpayers' money, is a fair point, isn't it?
No, because your standing assumption there is completely wrong. The councils would change in 2 years' time, OK? And you would have shadow councillors in the run-up to it. But some of these councillors, if these elections had been cancelled, they would have been councillors for 6 or 7 years with no accountability, never being held to account for their actions. And let's remember that Angela Rayner, when she was in that job a year ago, she promised these elections would only be postponed for 1 year, whereas actually some of the counties like Norfolk and Suffolk and East and West Sussex, they've been cancelled for the second year on the trot. I mean, when do you stop? There was no guarantee that these elections that they planned to cancel this year would go ahead next year as were promised, based on the track record from last year.
You don't think your Doge efficiency unit that you're going to set up, Mr. Tice, might have views on tens of millions of taxpayers' money being spent on new councillors rather than just keeping these existing ones for another year or two?
We're saving plenty of hundreds of millions elsewhere, and we recognise there is an important value and price of democracy. But the good news is that we hopefully are going to do really well in these May the 7th elections. I think many voters will actually say, let's give an extra bloody nose to the Labour Party.
I hate to be cynical here, but is that ultimately what this is about? That in Reform that you're on course to have quite a good set of local election results and you didn't want them to be delayed for 12 months. It's less about national interest, is it, and more about Reform's interest here?
But it's the reverse point that you should be most terrified, and your listeners should be most terrified of, where you've got a government who feared they were going to do badly in elections. And so they said, well, let's just cancel them. Let's just put them in the bin. I mean, what a terrifying precedent that is for our nation. So when you get to the general election and there's a bit of a hiccup, economy's not doing very
Keir
well.
Starmer, if he's still imposed by then, he's not going to cancel the next general election, Mr. Tice. That's ridiculous.
I'm sorry, but once you get a taste for cancelling things, and it suits you, well, who knows where it ends? It's very important to put a marker down. That's what we've done, and it was telling also that, of course, the chairman of the Electoral Commission agreed with reform on this issue.
You'd be very against Donald Trump trying to seek a third term, then, Mr. Tice, would you? Based on what you've
Yes, because that's against the rules of the game in the United States. A US president, it's 2 terms and you're done.
Understood. A couple of other issues just to get your thoughts on, if we could, while we've got you, sir. Youth unemployment, we're talking about this hour. Britain's youth unemployment rate now exceeding the EU average. What do you think we're getting so wrong in this country when it comes to young people not being in work?
Well, sadly, this Labour government has dramatically increased the minimum wage for 16 to 24-year-olds. And essentially, they've priced them out of the market because there's no incentive to employ someone younger if you can employ someone with more experience for the same wage, age 25
so
or
do you
older.
think those young people should be paid less?
Well, historically, that's been the nature of it, because young people, by definition, they're learning, they're being trained, they might be on an apprenticeship or whatever, and that's a natural part of the evolution of gaining experience in the workplace, and that's a great thing. And,
would reform reduce
the evidence is crystal clear that now employers are actively disincentivized from employing young people. What a catastrophe! How stupid can anybody be?
So if you were in government, would reform cut the minimum wage for young people to get more of them into work? Is that on the table?
Well, we'll be talking about that over the coming weeks. We've got to re-look at it because the evidence is immediately there within a matter of 6 to 9 months that this has had a catastrophic impact, as well, of course, of the impact of national insurance contribution rises, employment rights, fears from the dreadful Employment Rights Bill. All of these things have a cumulative impact, which means that employers are saying,
but just to be very clear on that specific point, a potential pay cut for millions of young workers on the minimum wage is something you are considering.
If you're unemployed, 100% of nothing is nothing.
No, but we're talking specifically about the minimum wage here and whether it needs to be cut for young people.
But the wage is irrelevant if you're not employed.
Yeah, but the young
businesses are not employing you, so it's much better to say, actually, look
at the young people who are employed on the minimum wage, obviously would also be affected by a cut in the minimum wage.
And that's why I'm not going to make policy on the hoof. That's why you've got to look at the implications of this.
But you're looking at it.
We've got to look at all of this because they've got themselves in a terrible pickle, and sometimes it's then quite hard to unwind these things.
And to young people who say, well, I'm in work, I'm earning the minimum wage, why on earth would I vote reform if they think I should potentially earn even less than I'm getting? What would you say?
Well, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is other young people are not being employed who could be and should be because of this extra cost, and it's a significant disadvantage. But it's now it's a complicated issue because of the way they've done it.
Can I just ask you about the case of Hamid Koskan, if you're familiar with it? This is the man who was prosecuted in this country for setting fire to a copy of the Quran. The Trump administration has now said it's in talks to consider him being allowed to enter the US as a refugee, as a free speech asylum seeker, effectively. I don't know how familiar you are with the case, Mr. Tice, but do you think he should have been prosecuted for what he did?
I have to be honest, I'm not familiar with the case, so I just can't comment. As I say, I've been so focused on this issue around the local elections and other issues. I just haven't got across it.
I wanted to ask you because we're talking about later in the show, but just more broadly, do you have a sort of view on whether something like setting fire to a Quran should be a criminal matter?
Well, it's a very offensive matter, it's. Why would anybody want to do that? Is just frankly defies all rational, reasonable behaviour and common sense. Where it enters about criminality things, as I say, I'm not across the.
That's fair enough. I won't. If you're not familiar with the case, I won't push you on the details of the specific case. One final question. One of your former parliamentary colleagues, Rupert Lowe, setting up a new party today. Are you worried? Is this a prospect of taking votes off reform?
No, we're not worried at all. Competition's a good thing. Of course, we've said that with regard to the Conservatives. and Rupert's made his decision. So it seems to me that he'll be vying for votes with Ben Habib's Advance UK. So,
but anyway, that's what I mean. There's quite a lot of
We've been talking about democracy, and good luck to them all. It's a competitive world out there.
As you said, there's now at least 3 parties in a relatively sort of similar political space. There must be a concern that they're going to split your vote.
No, we know how challenging it is to be able to secure thousands and thousands of candidates to build a grassroots movement. And look, at the end of the day, that is the joy of democracy. People can put something forward. They'll make their decisions as to whether they stand in particular areas. So be it.
Understood. Good to have you on. Thank you very much, Steve, for your time tonight. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK and MP for Boston and Skegness. Interesting there, isn't it? Clearly not ruling out the potential. They haven't decided, but they are actively considering, is how I took it, whether young people should be paid less if they are in work in order to get more young people who aren't in work into jobs.